Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp were all down and inaccessible for more than 6 hours on Monday when a widespread global outage impacted billions of angry users and sent the company's share price plummeting. Facebook's share price, already under pressure following damaging whistleblower allegations, had dropped by as much as 6%, and that's according to MarketWatch. Additionally, WhatsApp, a subsidiary of Facebook, became the #1 trending topic on Twitter. This was followed by hashtag Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, and hashtag delete Facebook. But if there's one takeaway from this episode to teach business leaders, it's the importance of a primed professional public relations team that is able to tackle the task of communicating even when social media goes into meltdown. Now, communications expert Madelain Roscher, the CEO of PR Worx, she joins us to further discuss this. Madelain, a very good morning to you. Thank you so much for your time. Let's just talk about the PR mess that shutdown of Facebook, followed, of course, by the testimony of the whistleblower in front of Congress as well.
Yes, hi, good morning. An absolute pleasure to be here. Monday. Yeah, when Facebook went down on Monday, I think South Africa was in an absolute panic. And I think we also then realized how much we are reliant on social media as a means of communication.
I mean, that was quite, worrisome for a lot of South Africans, especially those who do their business on social media. I mean, social media has now become a sort of business hub with all sorts of influences and all that. But there are also big companies that rely heavily on the platforms.
Definitely. I think when we experienced the outage on Monday, first thing that South Africans did is they checked their cell phone connection. You know, immediately you assume the network must be down or it's my cell phone provider issue. I'm not sure about you, but I restarted my phone at least 3 times to make sure that the fault doesn't sit on my side. And when you realize it's not just Facebook, it's WhatsApp, and it's platforms across the group, and then all of a sudden, that's when South Africa went into panic. When we started thinking about ideas around this in terms of how to communicate, our head of creative came to me and she said to me, how did you communicate before social media? You know, real millennial mindset. And I caught my mind back and I said to her, before I started up PR Worx, I was at South African Airways. And if we needed to get out urgent news, you would either pick up the phone, you know, step number 1, and I think people forgot about that on Monday, and communicate. Or number 2, I would draft a press release, fax it through to the relevant people, or sometimes you would even pull up that press release, print it out, and drive out to the editors and pitch your story then and there. So I do think that in the modern era, a lot of people have forgotten how to communicate because it's so easy to pick up your phone and send a WhatsApp to somebody instead of actually picking up the phone and making a phone call to somebody to get your story across. People were saying, how am I going to communicate with my family? How am I going to communicate with my clients? Exactly how you used to in the past. And I think that's where the crisis communications failure came in, because people didn't realize, you know, there are other tools in my marketing communication strategy arsenal, and they literally just couldn't take those out of the cupboard to unpack them.
I mean, one would argue that those tools are a bit more cumbersome than social media. Of course, at a touch of a button, you can engage with hundreds or thousands or even millions of users at a go on social media. Now, to make, you know, phone calls or print press releases and all of that is a lot more work. But would this crisis have given companies a bit of, you know, something to chew on regarding communication if and when this does happen again?
I absolutely believe that. If I look at our own communications channels and the question that I had from my creative director, I do think that it permeates through every single business, regardless of whether you're in communications or not. You know, whether you're an SMME or a large multinational company, everybody does some form of marketing. So with the outage of Facebook and WhatsApp and Instagram, people didn't know how to communicate, but they forgot, like I said, about LinkedIn. They forgot that they've got, by the way, they also forgot about Telegram, which signed up their record numbers on Monday with the outage. Signal also signed up a massive amount of people onto their systems as well. So there's definitely that direct communication, but you also have internal communication channels, and you also have the media. If you really need to get out something that is critical to the nation, you know, you could easily pitch it to the media. If it is directly to your stakeholders, what about your business-to-business communications channels? You know, you've got email. Again, you've got telephones, you've got call centers. There are numerous ways, but I do think what companies realize is that often they think they don't require a communications plan because I'm not in aviation or in the aviation sector. I'm not an airline. I'm not going to have an airplane that's going to fall out the sky, so I don't need a crisis communications plan. I do think what a lot of companies now realize, especially at board level, is that if communications falls flat, what do we do? If we have a crisis or an emergency situation, what do we do if the lines are down? You'll see that the Minister of Communication even went out and said that we as South Africans need to create our own platform like we had with Mixit years ago. So I do think that people need to understand that, A, they need a crisis communications team. So if something happens, who do I call? Who's going to escalate that? Who's going to speak on behalf of the business? And this is another critical element. You know, often people think, I have got Joe Soap, who's been in this technical position for the last 20 years. He knows everything about the company, so we'll put him forward to the media. And it doesn't mean because he knows everything about the company that he's necessarily going to be a great brand ambassador for the company. You know, in terms of the crisis communications plan, what are the potential vulnerable areas? And every company knows what those vulnerable areas are, but you need to take some time to sit around a boardroom table and to literally unpack each and every one of them and to understand what the impact is going to be on the business, but at the same time, to understand who the stakeholders are and how do you engage with those stakeholders when you don't have X communication channels in place. Another good lesson that came through is that you need to have a good social media as well as media monitoring system in place. You need to understand what market sentiment is. I think if there is one thing that Facebook realized from this is that they should have communicated a lot sooner. You know, they had a couple of tweets out, obviously on a competitor platform, and Twitter had a field day with that. And, you know, Twitter went out with something, and I just want to read it to you, and it said, hello, literally everyone. And everybody else jumped on the bandwagon. And McDonald's said, hi, what can I get you? And Adele went out and she said, hello. So at one stage, Facebook was at the mercy of its competitors to communicate. And I think that's what corporate companies realize now as well, is they need to understand what they've got in place. You know, they could have used the media. Any single media newsroom would have taken them on board to say, come tell us, what is the real story behind this? What actually happened? How is it possible that one server or one technical glitch can cause the entire world to go down?
I mean, so what you're essentially saying is that Facebook's crisis communication plan was ineffective. If I'm understanding you correctly, you mentioned the fact that they ended up resorting to Twitter to communicate the outage. But as you said yourself, you switched your phone on and off a couple of times to check what the problem was. So do you feel that they handled this crisis effectively, Facebook and WhatsApp and Instagram?
No, I really don't believe that they managed it effectively. I think, number one, they took too long. The first rule with regards to crisis communications is it needs to be fast and accurate. They weren't fast enough. People were speculating for too long. You know, by the time it hit hour 6, possibly going into hour 7, there was so much damage caused. And I printed out a stat that Market Watch said is, you know, the outage cost the company 2.4 million rand a minute in revenue. If they had communicated a lot quicker and to their specific stakeholders, again, using a variety of channels, not just their own, they could have saved the company 600 billion rand in market cap. Apparently, Mark Zuckerberg lost 90 billion rand in his personal capacity because he has a 14% stake in the company. And the market closed with them being 6% down. But more so, they had 3.5 billion very, very angry consumers on their hands because they did not speak up quick enough.
I mean,
to this day, even if you Google Facebook now in terms of what caused the outage, there are so many different stories that one is not certain to say, I can for sure tell you that this was the reason, and going forward, we know for a fact that we can combat this.
I mean, when it rains, it pours then for Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg, but it's difficult times, especially with the whistleblowers' testimony added to all of that. 6% of a drop in the share price, as you mentioned, in money is a huge figure of money. But let's talk about how then you know, you mentioned that they were ineffective in handling their crisis, Facebook. Bring this to the maybe smaller company who doesn't have billions of end users. If they were in a similar crisis, a PR crisis as well, what kind of advice would you give them as to how they can handle such crises?
Well, first of all, I think the biggest key lesson that anyone can take from this is don't wait until you have a crisis to have a crisis communications plan in place. I always joke with our crisis clients when I say, you know, they consider us like the fatties and monies woman that's stashed away in the cupboard, and you bring her out to make the spaghetti. And it's the same thing with regards to crisis communications experts. They keep us in the cupboard. Once there is a crisis, they bring you out, dust you off, and put you out there. And very often, you know, you don't have the full story. You don't have the company's background. And you jump in and you help as much as what you can, but it's not necessarily quick, accurate, and reliable information. And those are the three key rules that I believe Facebook didn't have. So number one, have that crisis communications plan in place. Plan for every possible scenario. Make sure that you attract the right stakeholder to you. Make sure that you can interest them with the right message. Make sure that you can maintain that message all the way through until the end of the crisis. So that applies to all companies, not just Facebook.
Madelain Roscher, thank you so much for your time this morning. It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you for unpacking what this crisis meant for Facebook. She's the CEO of PR Worx.